Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to be talking about some nonfiction that I have read over the past few months. We've got a couple essay collections, a literary biography, an Egyptian queen, and even some Tudor royal drama. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with the two essay collections. The first one being I Want to Burn This Place Down by Maris Kreizman. This was published in 2025, and it is a collection of personal essays where Kreisman reflects on her evolution from rule follower who believed that hard work would guarantee success and stability to someone deeply disillusioned with American institutions and social systems. I picked this up because I seem to have a lot in common with this author. We're roughly the same age, roughly the same education. We both have no children. We both are liberal feminists. I also used to be a rule follower. And so, based on the description on the flap, Kreisman was disturbed by the depth and scope of the liberal myths in which she once believed. Kreisman revisits some of her most profound revelations, demonstrating that it's never too late to become radicalized. By that description, I thought I was going to get some real anger and radical action. I thought it was going to be a scathing takedown of American capitalism, but this collection did not inspire me to burn anything down, which I guess is a good thing. Keeps me out of jail. The anger here is tame. There isn't much action. Kreisman was not radicalized, just really disappointed and disillusioned. I mean, fair. Same. This really is just a collection of honest and personal essays going over things in her life, such as her struggle with type 1 diabetes and her fear with living with such a disease with America's terrible healthcare system, her disillusionment with the American dream as she struggled to survive in the publishing industry, and also her frustration with the box that women with or without children have to put themselves in with respect to their careers. For example, if you don't have kids, shouldn't you be a workaholic girl boss? Or if you're not a girl boss, why can't you stay home with your kids? Isn't there anything in the middle? And these essays are not bad. They are just not what I expected. I thought she was at least going to be actively trying to burn shit down. But no, she, like me, is just sitting and working and stressing, but not really doing anything. But maybe that is the kick that I need to actually take some radical action. I don't know. We'll see. But I do recommend this, but don't be deceived by the title and the description in the flat. Nobody's burning anything. Nobody's radicalized. It's just some honest personal essays. This next essay collection, however, did give me exactly what I want, and that is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. And this was published in 2014. And in Bad Feminist, Gay explores feminism, culture, and the everyday contradictions of being a woman in the modern world. Gay argues that the label feminist often carries unrealistic and or rigid expectations, which she calls essential feminism. For example, to be a feminist, you must only like empowered art, reject popular culture, and be flawless. Instead, Gay embraces being a bad feminist, meaning that she can love things that are messy, rap music, the color pink, contradictory impulses, and she sometimes falls and stumbles. But she still believes in gender equality and wants to fight for a more inclusive feminism. Gay often discusses how race, class, body size, sexuality, and popular culture interface with feminism. And she points out how feminist discourse has been dominated by narrow, often white middle class perspectives. In addition to serious topics such as sexual violence, body image, and power, Gay also discusses fun things such as her favorite TV shows, books, and even how she used to play competitive Scrabble, which that essay fascinated me. That was probably one of my favorite essays in the collection. This collection is honest, it's witty, and she does not claim to be perfect. Instead, she invites us to a feminism that allows for mistakes, messiness, multiple identities and cultural contradictions. For example, it is okay to be a feminist and read trashy romance books. You can do both. Next, I read Alice Walker, A Life by Evelyn C. White. I no longer have my copy. I'm letting my mother borrow it, so I'll put a picture up here somewhere. And this was published in 2004, and the biography traces the life of Alice Walker from her childhood as the youngest of 8 children in a Georgia sharecropping family through her rise as one of the most influential Black American writers and activists in the 20th century. White covers Walker's early life under segregation and poverty, including a traumatic childhood incident where I think she was about 8 years old. She was shot with a BB gun by one of her brothers, and that left her blind permanently in one eye. Walker was then educated at Spelman College and then later Sarah Lawrence, where she began developing her voice as a writer and activist. She then married civil rights attorney Melvin Leventhal, who was white and Jewish, and their marriage was one of the first legal interracial marriages in Mississippi, and they faced many challenges during the turbulent 60s and 70s in Mississippi because of their marriage. White also covers the evolution of Walker's writing, including her best-known work, The Color Purple, published in 1982, which won Walker the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, the first Black woman ever to win the award. White also explores Walker's complexities, such as the tensions between her rural and urban identities, her relationships, some not so great, even her controversial positions. So this biography is balanced. It doesn't fawn over its subject. So I really liked this biography. Although I have to say, by the end, I was getting slightly weary. Not weary of Walker or White's portrayal of Walker, but the constant controversy that seemed to engulf Walker, no matter where she went or what she did. Walker just couldn't seem to please anybody. On one hand, she catered to whites, or she didn't cater enough to whites. She wasn't gay enough. She was too gay. She didn't portray nice Black male characters, or she portrayed characters that were too Black. She didn't show enough reverence for institutions, etc., etc. She just couldn't make anybody happy. The list goes on. And to me, it just shows that artists will never please all the people all the time, and that they just need to create their art for themselves and then release it into the world. From what I gathered of this biography, Walker appears to be that all-encompassing artist that can sometimes be self-absorbed and forget about the people in her life, not being cruel or mean, just that she's on a different plane of existence and nobody else can seem to make the journey with her. And I'm sure that must have been very, very frustrating for her friends and family. One thing that I couldn't really wrap my head around was Walker's communing with her ancestors, and she would move all over the country in order to find a place where her characters would want to live. I couldn't comprehend, but that is also maybe why I am not an artist. I am not a writer. I just don't have the frame of reference for that. That being said, she still lived a fascinating life during some of the most tumultuous years in American history. I adore The Color Purple and consider it a true American classic. But funny enough, even after reading this, I have no desire to read any of Walker's other novels or poetry. I have no idea why. I do have a collection of her nonfiction essays that I do plan to read, but as for her poetry and her other novels, I just don't have any interest to read them. I am just so happy with the gift of The Color Purple that that's enough for me. I do recommend this biography, and if you have not read The Color Purple, please do so. You will not be disappointed. Okay, next I have Cleopatra, A Life by Stacy Schiff. In this biography, Schiff presents the story of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, by stripping away much of the myth and romantic legend to reveal a politically astute and intellectually formidable ruler. Essentially, Schiff is trying to rehabilitate Cleopatra's reputation, which, unsurprisingly, was written by men. They sexualized her instead of treating her as a politically savvy monarch. So Cleopatra VII of the Ptolemaic dynasty ascends the throne as a co-ruler with one of her brothers, to whom she was married. The Egyptian pharaohs often married siblings. She ruled for roughly 22 years, navigating the rise of Rome's dominance throughout the world. At one point, her brother husband overthrew her, and that is how she ended up engaging herself with Julius Caesar in order to get her throne back. Schiff portrays Cleopatra's romantic relationships with both Caesar and Mark Antony as strategic alliances. Schiff also emphasizes Cleopatra's immense capabilities. She was multilingual. She was the only Ptolemaic pharaoh to learn Egyptian. So in case you didn't know, the Ptolemies were actually Greek. They were not Egyptian. They ruled Egypt for about 300 years, but they were not native Egyptians. They came from Greece. So she was the only pharaoh in hundreds of years that bothered to learn Egyptian culture and language. And she was also actively involved in governance, diplomacy, military affairs, and economic strategy. Schiff also examines how most of what we believe about Cleopatra today, her seductress image, her dramatic death, derives from Roman propaganda, legends, and then later arts and mischaracterizations. I'm looking at you, Shakespeare. You know what you did. Cleopatra's story concludes with her downfall after losing a battle against Rome's Octavian. She and Mark Antony die within days of each other, and then Egypt is absorbed into the Roman Empire. In short, Schiff's Cleopatra is a sovereign, intelligent, ruthless, and ruling in an extremely volatile political landscape. Schiff gives her the dignity of being a leader instead of a historical footnote in some Roman propaganda. So I enjoyed this very much. The pace was good, the language is accessible. However, I did find that Schiff's language was almost a little too familiar, and she expected the reader to pick up on some comparisons that not everyone would necessarily understand. For example, one time she described Cleopatra's second husband, who I think was also another brother, as being like the ballerina's male partner, a support but not necessarily needed. It was just a weird comparison to me, and I'm not sure why she worded it that way. And then she also made another comparison to some American founding father. Unfortunately, I can't remember which. And that definitely wouldn't be common understanding for everyone. So that's my only gripe, the kind of over familiarity of the language. But otherwise, highly recommend. Okay, next I have two related Tudor biographies. First one is Hunting the Falcon, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, and the Marriage That Shook Europe by John Guy and Julia Fox. And the other being Thorns, Lust, and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn by Estelle Perrunk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I should have looked it up. Sorry. Anyway, Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII. Anne was more than a mistress. She was intelligent, she was well-trained, she was politically savvy. She spent her formative years at the French court and was influenced by French culture and diplomacy. She also tried to reshape the role at queen. She just did not want to be there just to bring the babies, although that essentially was her main role, to bring the sons. But she also mixed men and women socially at court and got herself involved in political matters. And one of the biggest fallouts of the marriage between Henry and Anne Boleyn was that he ended up breaking with the Church of Rome in order to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who was still alive, so that he could marry Anne. So that ushered in Protestantism into England, which was already starting to spread like wildfire in continental Europe. Now, remember, Henry VIII was not a Protestant. He was a full-on Catholic, 100%. The only thing he did was say to Rome, "You're not the boss of me." So based on this title, I thought that this book was going to be a deep examination into the marriage and its implications on England and the rest of Europe. All right, just what he did was absolutely unprecedented, and it affected not just England but literally the rest of Europe. So this did focus on the marriage. It wasn't a A to B biography, birth to death. It was focusing only on the marriage, and it actually ends with Anne in the Tower. It doesn't even go into her actual execution. However, it was still a chronology of events like any other biography. It didn't give me any new information or analysis. And inside the flap, it says that it's groundbreaking with fresh research, but I disagree. As someone who's read many Tudor biographies, nothing in this book was new. Yes, at the end, they do a little bit of analysis, but nowhere near what I was expecting. I was expecting a conversation on the anomaly that is Henry and Anne, and the things that he did to her, the things he did for her, and the things that he did with her. They were an anomaly. He truly loved this woman, and he was treating her as a partner, something that he did not do with any of his other wives. And her downfall was probably the cruelest. So I thought I was going to get an examination on that, specifically how the rest of Europe was affected with his break from Rome. Again, they do talk about it a little bit, but it is not groundbreaking research. Now, if you are new to Tudor history, this will definitely be great. Absolutely. It is very well written, very well researched. You can understand the language. So if you're new to Tudor history, I do recommend this. But if you, like me, were looking into just some more, you just wanted a little bit more analysis into the marriage, I did not get what I had hoped with this. Now, this next one, similar to Hunting the Falcon, the title is a little bit deceiving. The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. All right, so the title suggested to me that it would focus on the people who betrayed Anne and assisted in her downfall during the marriage. Instead, it focused only on the marriage, which great, okay, similar to Hunting the Falcon, we're only talking about the marriage. And it spent a lot of time on her relationship with France. It seemed like this whole book was about France's involvement in Henry and Anne's marriage. There was no real analysis on how Anne was truly betrayed by all of the people around her. Essentially, this was a not so good version of Hunting the Falcon. I actually do not recommend this. And if you want to read about Anne and Henry's marriage, I recommend Hunting the Falcon, not this. It's, this is shorter, but I feel like the information just, something about it just didn't sit right with me. And I don't know how well researched this is. So between Hunting the Falcon and Thorns, Lust, and Glory, if you want to learn about Anne and Henry's marriage, I suggest Hunting the Falcon. Skip this one. Okay, we haven't finished with Henry VIII. Sorry. So next is Young and Damned and Fair, The Life of Katherine Howard, Fifth Wife of King Henry VIII by Gareth Russell. So Katherine Howard was Henry's fifth wife and also first cousin to Anne Boleyn. She was a teenager when she married Henry in 1540, but no one truly knows how old she was. She might have been between 17 and 19. Catherine had a troubled early life. Her family was noble, but they were just broke. So she spent her youth under supervision of different relatives, mainly her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. But Catherine had very little formal education. So before Catherine became queen, and while living with the Dowager Duchess, she had intimate relationships with two men, her music teacher, Henry Mannix, and Francis Derham, who was a member of her step-grandmother's household. Catherine's downfall occurred when it was accidentally discovered that Catherine was writing to and having secret meetings with Thomas Culpeper, a courtier. It's unclear whether she did actually commit adultery with Thomas Culpeper, but both did confess to the intention of adultery. So adultery was treason, and so the courts had to argue whether Culpeper and Catherine's intention to commit adultery constituted as treason. As things unraveled and investigations went on into Catherine's early life, it was discovered that she had these early relationships. And so Catherine, Derham, Mannix, and Culpeper were all arrested. And only Catherine, Derham, and Culpeper were executed as traitors. Mannix got off. Derham's relationship with Catherine was well before she married Henry, so he technically wasn't a traitor because he did not commit adultery with her or intend to commit adultery. This happened many, many years before. But after this, Henry made it a law that any future queen must tell the king of any past sexual misadventures. So Russell makes the argument against certain perceptions of Catherine. First one being that she was a pawn of her ambitious relatives. There's actually no real evidence of that. It doesn't seem like they had even considered one iota of putting Catherine in front of Henry, and likely just took advantage of the opportunity when Henry noticed her. Russell also argues that Catherine wasn't entirely naive or stupid. She knew exactly what was expected of her as queen, and she played her part perfectly in public. She also knew what she was doing with Mannix and Derham when she was living with her step-grandmother. So Russell also argues against the perception that Catherine was sexually abused. So in the Tudor period, the age of consent for girls was very, very young. I believe it was 12 or 13, whereas for boys, it was 14. That being said, despite the age of consent being very young, the Tudors did understand sexual abuse, and it was not condoned. So according to Russell, there is no convincing evidence that Catherine did not have sexual agency with her relations with Mannix and Derham. And Russell makes the point that Catherine's fate was likely inevitable. She was in a dangerous environment with little real understanding of the stakes involved. She was swept up in political intrigue, factional rivalry, court jealousy, and a climate of general suspicion after Henry's 4 previous wives. So this was a good narrative biography about Catherine, and Russell is very sympathetic to her. She was perfect in public, but deeply flawed in private, and unfortunately just got swept up in a machine that was bigger than her, and it steamrolled her. And last, I have The Palace, From the Tudors to the Windsors, 500 Years of History at Hampton Court by Gareth Russell, so same author as the Katherine Howard biography. And this is a sweeping history of Hampton Court Palace, from its rise under the Tudors to its status in the modern day under the Windsors. Rather than focus on the architecture of the palace, Russell uses the palace as a lens by following people who lived there, monarchs, courtiers, exiles. He shows how British history, politics, religion, and culture evolved over 500 years. So Hampton Court started out as a modest manor and became a lavish residence under Cardinal Wolsey and then Henry VIII. It witnessed many dynastic events such as births, deaths, marriages. Shakespeare even staged the first productions of Hamlet and Macbeth for James I here. Charles I was held prisoner here after his defeat in the English Civil War. He even escaped. William and Mary constructed the beautiful Baroque section of the palace, along with the beautiful gardens. And then George II phased the palace out as a royal residence, and some parts of it became a grace and favor housing for royals, nobles, and exiles. Apartments were actually being granted well into the 1960s. Victoria opened it up, parts of the palace and the gardens, to the public in 1838, allowing the unwashed masses to view the royal splendor. The grace and favor residents at the time were not exactly pleased. And then by the 20th century, it became a heritage site and a public museum. So Russell shows us the palace shifting from royal residence to cultural monument, reflecting the broader changes in Britain. So you've got the decline of absolute monarchy, the rise of public heritage consciousness, and democratization of access to formerly elite spaces. This is an interesting premise of telling all of the monumental things that happened in one place over 500 years. So this was a really fun, gossipy read. I enjoyed it. I mean, I wasn't blown away by it, but I have been to Hampton Court Palace many, many years ago. But yeah, highly recommend. It's not a must read, but enjoyable. So that is all I have for you today. Let me know what nonfiction you have been reading, and have you read any of these? Please let me know. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day.